Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time. Way back to a place where the air hung heavy with suspicion and a single whispered accusation could unravel an entire life. Imagine yourself in colonial Salem, Massachusetts, a small, insular community nestled on the edge of a vast, untamed wilderness. It's the late 17th century, and life here is hard. The days are long, filled with ceaseless toil, battling harsh winters and unforgiving summers. You're constantly on edge, facing threats from every direction: disease, famine, and the ever present fear of Native American attacks. Your survival depends on the strength of your community, on shared faith and rigid adherence to a strict set of rules. This isn't some quaint historical reenactment. This is a raw, precarious existence where every decision, every belief, feels like it holds the weight of your very soul. And let's be real, you'd probably not last a week in this environment. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, tell me, where are you tuning in from tonight? And what time is it there? I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the chill of the New England winter bite at your exposed skin, even indoors. The homes are small, drafty, and lit by the flickering glow of a single fireplace or a few tallow candles. The days are short, and the nights are long, leaving ample time for introspection, for prayer, and for the insidious creeping in of fear. You spend your evenings huddled by the fire, listening to the wind howl outside, a sound that, to the Puritan mind, could easily be interpreted as the wailing of malevolent spirits. This deeply religious community lives by the word of God, a strict interpretation that views the world as a constant battle between good and evil, with the devil lurking in every shadow, eager to ensnare the unwary. You've been taught from birth that temptation is everywhere, and that even the slightest deviation from piety could open a door for Satan to enter your heart. The year is 1692. A small group of young girls in Salem Village begins to exhibit strange behaviors. You hear whispers from your neighbors, hushed conversations about fits, contortions, and speaking in tongues. It starts with Betty Paris, the minister's daughter, and her cousin, Abigail Williams. They are young, impressionable, and perhaps a little bored with the monotony of Puritan life. Initially, their afflictions are dismissed as a childish prank, or perhaps an illness. But as the symptoms escalate, becoming more violent and dramatic, the adults in the community, steeped in their fervent religious beliefs, begin to search for a more sinister explanation. They look to their scriptures, to their understanding of the spiritual world, and the only logical conclusion, in their minds, is that the devil himself is at work. You observe the fear building, a tangible presence in the community. People start looking at each other differently, a flicker of suspicion in their eyes. The girls' fits are unsettling to witness. You hear descriptions of them screaming uncontrollably, throwing themselves to the ground, and complaining of invisible forces pinching and biting them. To a modern observer, these symptoms might suggest a range of medical or psychological conditions, from epilepsy to mass hysteria. However, in 17th century Salem, medical knowledge is rudimentary, and the prevailing worldview leaves little room for such natural explanations when something so inexplicable occurs. The devil, for them, is a very real, tangible entity capable of inflicting such torment. The first fingers of accusation point towards the marginalized, the outsiders, the ones who already stood a little apart from the strict social norms of the village. You hear the name Tituba, a slave woman from the Caribbean, belonging to Reverend Paris's household. She is a natural target, an outsider in every sense, ethnically, socially, and religiously. Her stories of magic and voodoo, perhaps shared innocently with the girls, are twisted and misinterpreted, seen as evidence of her devilish pacts. Then there's Sarah Good, a poor, often irritable woman who smokes a pipe and is known for her begging. She's seen as an undesirable element, easily cast as a witch because she already defies the image of a pious Puritan woman. Finally, Sarah Osborne, an elderly, infirm woman who rarely attends church and is embroiled in a legal dispute over her deceased husband's will. She's another easy target, someone already on the fringes, whose perceived eccentricities can now be reinterpreted as signs of witchcraft. You realize how vulnerable those on the margins of society are when fear takes hold. The accusations aren't random. They fall on those who are already viewed with suspicion or who don't quite conform to the rigid societal expectations. You see how easily a community can turn on its most vulnerable members when gripped by panic. The girls, encouraged by the attention they are receiving and perhaps genuinely believing themselves tormented, continue to point fingers. Their dramatic performances, though unsettling, lend credibility to their claims in the eyes of a terrified populace. The adults, including the respected elders and ministers, believe these young girls are suffering at the hands of malevolent forces, and they feel a sacred duty to unmask the perpetrators. You stand by as the first formal examinations begin. The accused are brought before local magistrates, men like John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin, who are charged with determining if there is enough evidence to send them to trial. These examinations are not like modern legal proceedings. There are no defense attorneys, no presumption of innocence. Instead, the magistrates act as inquisitors, their primary goal to extract a confession. You witness the girls brought in to confront the accused. As the accused women are questioned, the girls often fall into fits, claiming the accused are tormenting them with invisible specters. This is the terrifying concept of spectral evidence, testimony from the afflicted that they see the specter or spirit of the accused tormenting them. This intangible, unprovable evidence becomes the cornerstone of the accusations, a chilling departure from any rational legal standard. You feel a knot in your stomach as you realize the implications. If someone can simply claim they see your spirit attacking them, and that claim is accepted as truth, then anyone can be accused, and anyone can be convicted. It's a terrifying precedent, and it leaves no room for defense. How do you prove that your invisible spirit isn't tormenting someone? The accused are often told that if they are truly innocent, God will reveal it. But in the face of overwhelming accusations and the physical torments of the afflicted, the pressure to confess is immense. Confession, while condemning them as a witch, is often presented as the only path to salvation, a chance to escape the gallows. It's a twisted logic where admitting guilt, even falsely, offers a glimmer of hope, while steadfast denial often seals one's fate. The magistrates, themselves devout Puritans, are convinced that they are engaged in a righteous battle against the devil himself. They see the girls' suffering as undeniable proof of witchcraft. You hear the ministers preach sermons filled with vivid descriptions of Satan's cunning and his desire to corrupt their pious community. This constant reinforcement of the devil's presence and power fuels the public's fear and bolsters the belief that witches are truly among them. The line between religious conviction and paranoid delusion begins to blur, and you can sense the community spiraling into a collective psychosis. One fascinating yet little-known detail from this period is the touch test. If an accused witch looked upon the afflicted and their fits ceased, it was considered proof that the witch's power was responsible for the torment. Conversely, if the afflicted touched the accused and their fits stopped, it was also taken as a sign of the witch's guilt, as their power was believed to be transferred through touch. This circular logic, where any outcome could be interpreted as proof of guilt, highlights the utter lack of objective evidence in these proceedings. It's a chilling reminder of how easily reason can be abandoned in the grip of mass hysteria. Historians still debate whether the girls' afflictions were genuine, perhaps a form of conversion disorder or mass psychogenic illness, or if they were deliberately feigning their symptoms for attention or other unknown motives. Some scholars suggest that the community's strict social controls and the intense religious atmosphere may have created an environment ripe for such an outbreak of mass hysteria. Others point to possible ergot poisoning from contaminated rye grain, which can cause symptoms similar to those observed in the afflicted girls. Regardless of the underlying cause, the consequences were devastating. You feel the tension in the air, a palpable dread that hangs over the village. The lines of trust begin to erode, replaced by suspicion and fear. Every unusual event, every unexplained misfortune, is now viewed through the lens of witchcraft. A cow falls ill, witchcraft. A child suffers a fever, witchcraft. The community turns inward, devouring itself with fear and accusations, and you can see how easily a society can descend into chaos when paranoia takes root. This chilling beginning is just the first step into a nightmare that will forever be etched in the annals of American history. You find yourself immersed deeper into the growing paranoia that grips Salem. The initial accusations, while terrifying, were just the opening act. Now, the stage is set for a chilling escalation as the girls, seemingly emboldened by the attention and the validation of their elders, begin to cast their nets wider. You watch as the fear morphs from a quiet dread into a palpable, almost suffocating presence that permeates every aspect of daily life. No longer are the whispers confined to hushed corners. They now echo through the meeting house, along the narrow dirt paths, and even within the sanctity of homes. The examinations of Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne are not just judicial proceedings, they are public spectacles. You witness the dramatic performances of the afflicted girls, their screams and contortions amplifying the terror in the room. When Tituba, under immense pressure and likely fearing for her life, begins to confess, a collective gasp ripples through the crowd. Her confession, though perhaps coerced and fantastical, provides the community with the evidence they desperately seek. She speaks of flying through the air on a stick, of seeing the devil in various forms, and, most damningly, of other witches in the village. This is a pivotal moment. Her confession, rather than quelling the fears, pours gasoline on the fire. It validates the community's darkest suspicions and, critically, names more individuals, thus expanding the terrifying scope of the hunt. You feel a profound sense of unease as you realize the implications of Tituba's confession. She names Bridget Bishop, a woman already known for her independent spirit and a somewhat scandalous past, having been accused of witchcraft years prior but acquitted. Bishop is a tavern owner, a woman who wears a scarlet bodice and is known for her quarrels with neighbors, hardly the picture of a demure Puritan woman. She's a perfect target, already on the fringes of acceptable society, and her previous run-in with the law makes her an easy mark for renewed suspicion. You witness the girls react with heightened hysteria in her presence, their fits becoming more violent. The sheer theatricality of these proceedings is unsettling. You see the girls collapsing, writhing, and pointing their fingers with dramatic flourish, claiming to see the specters of the accused tormenting them. It's a performance, yes, but one so utterly convincing to the terrified onlookers that it becomes an undeniable truth. The magistrates, desperate to stop the unseen tormentors, press for more names, more confessions. The cycle feeds itself. Accusations lead to arrests, which lead to examinations, which lead to more accusations, each step solidifying the community's belief in the pervasive presence of witchcraft. A common historical fact you'd be acutely aware of is that spectral evidence, the testimony of the afflicted that they saw the specter or spirit of the accused tormenting them, became the cornerstone of these trials. This was incredibly problematic because it was entirely subjective and impossible to disprove. How do you argue that your spirit wasn't somewhere else, pinching someone, when you were physically present in the room? You couldn't. This fundamentally flawed type of evidence meant that once accused, proving your innocence became an almost impossible task. You're trapped in a nightmare where your very thoughts and unseen actions are twisted against you. You notice the increasing number of arrests. The jails in Ipswich and Boston begin to fill with accused men and women, often elderly, infirm, or simply those who had somehow slighted a neighbor or defied community norms. The conditions in these jails are horrific. You imagine the cold, damp stone cells, the meager rations, and the constant fear. These aren't places designed for rehabilitation or comfort. They are grim holding pens for those awaiting what often feels like an inevitable doom. The psychological toll alone must be immense, trapped with your thoughts, knowing that your life hangs by a thread. One particularly bizarre and little-known detail from the trials involves the concept of witch cakes. This was a folk remedy, used by some in the community, to identify witches. It involved taking the urine of the afflicted individual, mixing it with rye meal, and baking it into a cake. This witch cake was then fed to a dog, with the belief that the dog, by consuming the witchcraft in the urine, would then be able to identify the witch who caused the affliction. The very notion that people believed this was a legitimate method of detection speaks volumes about the level of superstition and desperation that permeated Salem. You would find yourself baffled by such practices, wondering how rational thought could be so completely abandoned. As the accusations spread, they begin to touch the lives of more prominent citizens, individuals like Rebecca Nurse. You know Rebecca is a 71-year-old respected, pious, and well-regarded woman in the community. She is a pillar of the church, known for her gentle nature and good reputation. Her accusation sends shockwaves through the village. Many of her neighbors and friends bravely sign petitions attesting to her good character, risking their own reputations and even their lives to defend her. This act of defiance is courageous in a community gripped by terror, showing that not everyone succumbs to the hysteria. Yet, despite the overwhelming support, the afflicted girl's relentless accusations and dramatic fits ultimately prevail. You witness the horrifying realization that even unimpeachable character offers no shield against the storm of accusations. The courts, driven by a fervent desire to rid the community of what they believe to be the devil's influence, continue their work. You see the accused subjected to humiliating physical examinations, ostensibly to search for witch marks or devil's marks, moles, birthmarks, or any other blemish on the body that could be interpreted as a sign of a pact with Satan. These examinations are often performed by juries of women, further stripping the accused of their dignity and privacy. Any unusual mole or skin tag becomes damning evidence, twisted into proof of their unholy alliance. The pressure to confess is immense, almost unbearable. You hear stories of accused individuals being kept in chains, deprived of sleep, and subjected to relentless questioning. Confession, as mentioned before, often leads to a stay of execution, though it means admitting to terrible imaginary crimes and implicating others. Denial, however, almost invariably leads to conviction and the gallows. This creates a perverse incentive structure: lie and live. Tell the truth and die. You would struggle with such an impossible choice, wondering if you could ever find the strength to maintain your innocence in the face of such overwhelming odds. The trials themselves are a spectacle of raw emotion and fear. You might witness a scene where one of the accused, perhaps overwhelmed by the accusations and the sheer madness of the situation, begins to rail against their accusers. But this defiance is quickly interpreted as further proof of their guilt, an outburst of their demonic nature. Any attempt to logically refute the claims is met with renewed fits from the afflicted, further cementing the belief that the accused is indeed tormenting them. The sheer illogicality of the process would astound you. The intellectual debate amongst historians regarding the precise role of various factors, religious fervor, social anxieties, land disputes, and personal vendettas, in fueling the Salem Witch Trials remains ongoing. While some scholars emphasize the deep-seated Puritan belief in a literal devil and active witchcraft, others highlight the underlying social tensions and economic rivalries within the village as significant catalysts. The truth, perhaps, lies in a complex interplay of all these elements, creating a perfect storm for tragedy. You see how easily a group can be manipulated by fear, how quickly reason can be abandoned when panic sets in. The narrative of an invisible enemy, a malevolent force undermining the very fabric of their society, becomes a powerful, unifying, and ultimately destructive force. The community, desperate for answers and solutions, latches onto the simplest explanation: the devil is here, and he has agents among us. And so, the hunt continues, each new accusation tightening the noose around the innocent. The chilling realization dawns on you once the wheels of mass hysteria begin to turn. They are incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to stop. The stage is set for the first executions, a truly dark turning point in this harrowing saga. You stand in the oppressive atmosphere of Salem Village, the fear now a tangible entity, pressing in from all sides. The accusations have escalated beyond the marginalized. They now target individuals like John Proctor, a respected farmer and tavern keeper, and his wife, Elizabeth. You've known the Proctors as hardworking, independent people, perhaps a bit outspoken, but certainly not the type you'd associate with witchcraft. Their arrests send a shiver down your spine because if people like them can be accused, then truly no one is safe. You witness John Proctor's unwavering defiance in court, his refusal to be intimidated by the fits of the afflicted girls, which only seems to fuel their accusations against him. He famously argues that the girls are lying, and perhaps even coached, but his pleas fall on deaf ears in a courtroom consumed by panic and conviction. The pressure on the accused is immense. You imagine yourself in their position, subjected to relentless questioning, often for hours on end, without counsel or a clear understanding of the charges against you. The magistrates, convinced they are doing God's work, Interpret every tremor, every sigh, every moment of fear or frustration as a sign of guilt. If you cried, you were showing remorse for your pact with the devil. If you didn't cry, you were an unrepentant witch, devoid of human feeling. It was a no-win situation, a terrifying catch-22 designed to break your spirit and extract a confession. The legal system itself is utterly ill-equipped to handle such a phenomenon. The standard rules of evidence are twisted beyond recognition. Spectral evidence, as you've seen, becomes the primary means of conviction. You recall the historical debate while spectral evidence was initially admitted. Its controversial nature eventually led to its dismissal in later stages of the trials. But by then, the damage was already done. This pivotal shift, though too late for many, highlights a critical, if slow, reevaluation of the judicial process during this dark period. You can almost feel the collective sigh of relief from those who would later be tried, once this faulty evidence was no longer admissible. You witness the accused being brought before the Special Court of Oyer and Terminer, established specifically to deal with the overwhelming number of witchcraft cases. The very name, meaning to hear and to determine, implies a swift process. And indeed, swift it is. There's no time for lengthy deliberation or nuanced arguments. The judges, most notably Chief Justice William Stoughton, are staunch Puritans who genuinely believe they are combating a literal invasion of the devil's forces. Their faith, which ordinarily guides them, now blinds them to the possibility of judicial error or mass delusion. The public spectacle of the trials is constant. You see crowds gathered outside the meeting house, eager to witness the proceedings, a macabre form of entertainment for a populace consumed by fear. The air is thick with tension, a mix of morbid curiosity and genuine terror. The afflicted girls, often positioned prominently, continue their dramatic performances, their screams and contortions providing the chilling soundtrack to the courtroom drama. They are, in a disturbing way, the stars of this horrifying show, their power absolute and unquestioned. One striking, yet rarely discussed, historical detail is the presence of the touching test within the trials. As mentioned, if an accused witch looked upon the afflicted and the fit stopped, it was taken as proof. But sometimes, when the afflicted were in the throes of a fit, the accused would be forced to touch them. If, upon contact, the fits ceased, it was believed that the witch's malevolent power, which had been tormenting the afflicted from afar, was now transferred back into their body, thus proving their guilt. This barbaric practice, based on a twisted understanding of invisible forces, exemplifies the irrationality that permeated these proceedings. You can only imagine the sheer terror of being forced to participate in such a ritual, knowing that any outcome would be used against you. The first person condemned and executed as a witch in the Salem Witch Trials is Bridget Bishop. You remember her from the initial accusations, a woman already outside the social norms. Her trial is swift, and the spectral evidence against her is overwhelming. On June 10, 1692, you hear the grim news Bridget Bishop is hanged on Gallows Hill. Her death marks a terrifying turning point. It's no longer just about accusations and examinations, it's about life and death. The community's belief in the righteousness of their cause is solidified by this execution, yet for you, it sends a shiver of dread through your very being. The sight of the gallows, even in your mind's eye, is a stark reminder of the gravity of the situation. The executions don't stop the accusations. In fact, they seem to embolden the afflicted and the authorities. If the devil's agents are being rooted out and punished, then surely the process is just and necessary. You hear more names, more arrests. The jails fill up. The terror spreads like wildfire, consuming neighboring towns and villages, as people fear that the devil's influence is not confined to Salem alone. Children, even young ones, are among the accused, though none are ultimately executed. This particular aspect highlights the depths of the community's paranoia, extending their suspicions even to the most innocent. The concept of a coven also plays a significant role in the accusations. The Puritan belief system readily embraced the idea that witches worked in concert, forming groups or covens under the leadership of the devil himself. This notion served to amplify the threat, making it seem as if a vast, organized conspiracy of evil was at play. Accused individuals were often pressed to name others, to confess to attending witch meetings, and to describe the devil's book where they supposedly signed their names. These coerced confessions, often describing fantastical midnight gatherings, only served to reinforce the prevailing belief in a widespread satanic plot. Historians remain divided on the extent to which underlying land disputes and family rivalries played a direct role in shaping the accusations. While some scholars argue that pre-existing grudges and conflicts provided fertile ground for accusations to take root, others contend that the primary driver was genuine religious conviction and a profound fear of the devil. It's a complex interplay where personal animosities may have found an opportune outlet in the context of mass hysteria, allowing people to settle old scores under the guise of rooting out evil. You can see how easily human failings, jealousy, resentment, and a desire for revenge could be cloaked in the righteous garments of religious fervor. As the summer of 1692 progresses, the trials accelerate. You hear of multiple executions on Gallows Hill. One particularly harrowing account involves Giles Corey, an 81-year-old farmer who refused to enter a plea, neither guilty nor innocent. Under English common law, refusing to plead meant he could not be tried. To force a plea, he was subjected to peine forte et dure, a brutal form of torture where heavy stones were placed upon his body. You hear the horrifying details of his final moments. His only words? More weight. He died under the immense pressure, denying the court the satisfaction of a confession or a plea. His act of defiance, though ending in his agonizing death, is a powerful historical detail, serving as a silent protest against the injustice of the court. His refusal to plead meant his lands would not be forfeited, allowing them to pass to his heirs, a small but significant act of rebellion against a system designed to crush dissent. You feel the weight of these events, the sheer injustice of it all. The legal mechanisms designed to uphold order have instead become instruments of terror. The community, once bound by shared faith, is now tearing itself apart, fueled by a potent cocktail of fear, superstition, and perhaps underlying social tensions. The belief in spectral evidence, the coercive tactics of the court, and the unwavering conviction of the judges create an inescapable trap for the accused. You realize that in the face of such overwhelming collective delusion, individual reason and innocence stand little chance. The madness is not yet over. In fact, it is reaching its horrifying peak. You observe the horrifying crescendo of the Salem Witch Trials. The summer of 1692 is now at its peak, and with the warm weather, the fervor of the accusation seems to intensify rather than wane. The executions of Bridget Bishop and Giles Corey, though tragic, have done little to quell the hysteria. Instead, they appear to have solidified the community's grim resolve to cleanse itself of what it perceives as a demonic plague. You hear more names being called out, more arrests, and the jail cells, already overflowing, become even more crowded with the accused. The court of Oyer and Terminer, established to expedite these cases, is working tirelessly, or perhaps more accurately, relentlessly. You witness a disturbing pattern emerge once accused. Conviction seems almost inevitable. The judges, still convinced of the devil's pervasive influence, are quick to accept the spectral evidence and the dramatic performances of the afflicted. You feel a growing sense of despair as you watch innocent people, some you know personally, and brought before this tribunal, their fates sealed before a single word of defense can be uttered. A crucial, yet often overlooked detail of the trials is the role of confessions. You notice that those who confessed to witchcraft, even if their confessions were coerced or fantastical, often escaped the gallows. This created a perverse incentive: confess to a lie and live, or maintain your innocence and face almost certain death. You hear stories of people, broken by the conditions of imprisonment and the relentless pressure, fabricating elaborate tales of pacts with the devil, of attending witch meetings, and of tormenting their neighbors. These confessions, often rambling and filled with impossible details, were readily accepted as truth by the court, as they reinforced the narrative of a widespread satanic conspiracy. You feel a profound sense of anguish as you witness the execution of Rebecca Nurse. Despite the dozens of her neighbors and respected community members who bravely testified to her good character and piety, despite the initial not guilty verdict returned by the jury which the judges pressured them to reconsider, she is ultimately condemned. Her age, her reputation, and her unwavering faith are powerless against the torrent of spectral accusations. On July 19, 1692, Rebecca Nurse, along with 4 other accused witches, Sarah Good, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Howe, and Sarah Wilde's is led to Gallows Hill. You feel the collective gasp of the crowd, a mix of grim satisfaction and uneasy fear, as these individuals, pillars of the community or social outcasts, meet their end. This day marks one of the darkest moments of the trials, a horrific demonstration of how far the community has strayed from justice. The methods used to extract confessions or identify witches become increasingly bizarre. You hear whispers of the prayer test, where an accused witch was supposedly unable to recite the Lord's Prayer perfectly, often stumbling over words or omitting phrases. This, of course, was taken as proof of their unholy connection to the devil, who would presumably prevent them from uttering such sacred words. However, the immense stress and fear of the situation could easily cause anyone to falter. You also recall the grim and often fatal swimming test, though less prevalent in Salem than in other historical witch hunts, where an accused witch would be thrown into water. If they floated, it was believed the water, being pure, he would reject them as a witch, thus proving their guilt. If they sank, they were considered innocent, but often drowned in the process. You are struck by the sheer lack of any rational, scientific, or even consistently logical approach to these investigations. The trials are not confined to Salem Village. You realize the hysteria has spread like a contagion, infecting neighboring towns like Andover, Topsfield, and Ipswich. The Reverend Samuel Parris, whose daughter Betty was one of the first afflicted, actively participates in the examinations and trials, further cementing the legitimacy of the proceedings in the eyes of many. His fervent belief in the presence of the devil and his agents within the community adds significant weight to the accusations. The ministers, far from being voices of moderation, often act as catalysts, their sermons reinforcing the idea that God is testing them and that it is their sacred duty to root out the evil among them. The families of the accused also suffer immensely. You see property confiscated, reputations destroyed, and lives shattered. Children are left orphaned, and entire family lines are tainted by the stigma of witchcraft. The social fabric of the community, once tightly woven, is now torn and frayed by suspicion and division. Neighbors who once helped each other now eye each other with distrust, fearing that a casual word or an old grievance could lead to an accusation. This environment breeds a chilling atmosphere where denouncing others becomes a means of self-preservation, ensuring your own piety by condemning a neighbor. One fascinating academic debate that persists among historians is whether the Salem witch trials were primarily a result of genuine religious delusion and a belief in supernatural forces, or if they were, at their core, a manifestation of underlying social and economic tensions within the Puritan community. Some scholars argue that the division between the more traditional, agrarian Salem village and the commercially prosperous Salem town contributed to animosity, with accusations often falling along these lines. You can easily imagine how long-standing grievances, land disputes, and family feuds might suddenly find a terrifying new outlet in the context of witchcraft accusations, allowing individuals to target their enemies under the guise of religious righteousness. The truth, as often is the case with complex historical events, likely lies in a combination of these factors, creating a potent and destructive brew. You witness the execution of George Burroughs, a former minister in Salem Village, on August 19, 1692. His case is particularly significant because he is one of the few ministers accused. During his execution, he recites the Lord's Prayer perfectly, a feat that, according to prevailing beliefs, should have been impossible for a witch. Some in the crowd begin to murmur, showing signs of doubt. However, Cotton Mather, a prominent and influential minister from Boston who strongly supported the trials, quickly intervenes. He reminds the crowd that the devil can sometimes appear as an angel of light, capable of deceiving even at the gallows, thus silencing the emerging doubts and reinforcing the terrifying narrative. This moment, where a direct contradiction to witch behavior is dismissed by theological gymnastics, is a chilling demonstration of how deeply ingrained the delusion has become. The year 1692 sees 19 individuals hanged on Gallows Hill. One man, Giles Corey, is pressed to death. You also learn of others who die in prison due to the harsh conditions. The sheer scale of the tragedy is staggering for a small community. You are left with a profound sense of the arbitrary nature of the accusations and the terrifying power of collective fear. The summer draws to a close, But the nightmare of the trials continues, reaching its peak with a series of mass executions, each one a stark reminder of the human cost of irrationality and unchecked power. The question now is not if the madness will end, but when and at what further cost. You find yourself immersed in the escalating horror of the Salem Witch Trials, a period when the very fabric of society seems to be unraveling. The summer executions have done little to satiate the court's thirst for confessions or the community's fear of the devil. Instead, the relentless cycle of accusations and trials continues, drawing more and more innocent people into its terrifying vortex. You observe the deepening despair of those imprisoned, many of whom have endured months of harsh conditions, their hope dwindling with each passing day. The pressure to confess reaches an unbearable peak. You hear agonizing tales of individuals who, despite their innocence, are finally broken by the physical and psychological torment. They face a horrific choice: maintain their integrity and likely face the gallows, or confess to an impossible crime, betray their own conscience, and implicate others in order to save their lives. It's a cruel game, one designed to extract false admissions and, in doing so, validate the entire flawed process. You can almost feel the moral degradation in the air as truth becomes a casualty of survival. One chilling and often overlooked aspect of the confessions is their formulaic nature. You notice that many of the confessions, while seemingly spontaneous, often followed a similar script. Accused individuals would typically admit to signing the devil's book, encountering specters, and tormenting others. This uniformity suggests that the confessions were not genuine revelations, but rather responses to the leading questions of the magistrates and the intense pressure exerted upon the accused. It paints a grim picture of a legal system actively shaping the narrative of guilt rather than uncovering the truth. You witness the profound impact of these confessions on the community. Each new confession, no matter how outlandish, reinforces the public's belief that the devil is indeed active in Salem and that the trials are a necessary cleansing. These coerced admissions provide the proof that the skeptical might still demand, effectively silencing dissenting voices and further solidifying the narrative of a pervasive satanic conspiracy. It's a terrifying feedback loop. Fear leads to accusations. Accusations lead to forced confessions, and forced confessions fuel even greater fear. Consider the plight of someone like Mary Lacey Sr., accused along with her daughter, Mary Lacey Jr. Mary Sr. initially denies the charges, but under relentless pressure and perhaps hoping to save her daughter, eventually confesses. Her confession, like many others, describes meeting the devil and bewitching her neighbors. This act of confession highlights the impossible choices individuals faced. Was her confession genuine, or a desperate attempt to manipulate a system that offered no other escape? This academic debate continues to intrigue historians. Were these confessions genuine delusions, or calculated survival strategies in an insane environment? The profound psychological impact of prolonged interrogation, sleep deprivation, and the constant threat of execution cannot be overstated. A particularly disturbing, though less common, historical detail from the wider European witch hunts, which influenced the Salem mindset, involved the concept of familiars. These were believed to be animal spirits that served witches, aiding them in their malevolent acts. While less explicitly central in Salem than in some European cases, you might hear whispers of accused witches having strange animal companions or being seen with odd creatures, which would then be interpreted as evidence of these demonic familiars. Such beliefs further dehumanized the accused, associating them with the supernatural and evil. The sheer volume of cases is staggering. You learn that by the fall of 1692, over 150 people have been accused, and many are still languishing in jails across the region. The financial burden on the accused and their families is immense. They must pay for their own food and lodging in prison, for the fees of the jailers, and for the costs of their trials. Many families are ruined, their farms neglected, their livelihoods destroyed, even if their loved ones are eventually acquitted or escape execution. This economic devastation adds another layer of suffering to the already tragic events. The court continues its work, seemingly blind to the growing unease among some of the more thoughtful members of the community. Even some ministers, initially strong proponents of the trials, begin to express reservations, particularly as respected, Pious individuals continue to be accused and condemned. These early doubts are hesitant, whispered, and easily dismissed by the dominant narrative, but they represent the first cracks in the edifice of collective delusion. You see the internal struggle within the community, the battle between unwavering faith and creeping doubt. You reflect on the terrifying power of groupthink and the fragility of justice when fear reigns supreme. The Salem Witch Trials serve as a stark reminder of how quickly a society can abandon its principles and succumb to irrationality when faced with a perceived threat, whether real or imagined. The accused, trapped in this nightmarish scenario, become pawns in a larger societal drama, their individual suffering magnified by the collective madness around them. The question that historians still grapple with is how a seemingly rational, devout community could descend into such depths of paranoia and injustice. Was it a unique confluence of religious fervor, social anxieties, and a literal belief in the devil? Or does it speak to a more universal human susceptibility to mass delusion? There is no single, easy answer, and the complexity of the event continues to spark debate, prompting us to examine our own vulnerabilities to similar patterns of thought and behavior. You realize the story of Salem isn't just a historical anecdote, it's a cautionary tale, echoing through the centuries. You feel the atmosphere in Salem begin to shift, subtly at first, like the changing of a season. The relentless momentum of the trials, once seemingly unstoppable, now shows the faintest signs of faltering. It's the autumn of 1692, and the sheer number of accusations has become overwhelming. Jails are bursting, and the logistical nightmare of processing so many alleged witches is becoming apparent. More importantly, however, the accusations have now reached a critical mass, extending to individuals of such high standing and impeccable reputation that even the most fervent believers begin to question the legitimacy of the proceedings. You witness the growing discomfort among some of the colony's most influential figures, including prominent ministers and magistrates, as their own family members or close associates become targets. This is a crucial turning point. When the accusations were directed at the marginalized, the poor, or the eccentric, they were easier to accept. But when they touched the lives of the elite, the very people who uphold the social and religious order, the convenient narrative of a devil targeting only the unpious begins to crumble. The fear, once a unifying force, now threatens to tear apart the very foundation of the colonial government and church. One of the most significant moments that sows doubt is the accusation of Lady Mary Phipps, the wife of Governor William Phipps. Governor Phipps, having just returned from an expedition, finds his own wife caught in the terrifying web of accusations. This personal connection to the highest authority in the colony sends a clear signal that the trials have spiraled out of control. You can imagine the governor's shock and fury, realizing the madness has reached his own doorstep. This event, more than any other, forces the hand of the authorities to reevaluate the ongoing proceedings. A commonly known historical fact you'd be aware of is that the use of spectral evidence began to face increasing scrutiny. While it had been the bedrock of convictions, dissenting voices, particularly from a few brave ministers and legal scholars, started to argue forcefully against its admissibility. They pointed out the inherent unfairness. How could one defend against an invisible attack by a specter? They also raised the theological point that the devil could appear in the form of an innocent person, thus meaning that a specter appearing as someone did not necessarily mean that person was a witch. This critical legal and theological shift, though agonizingly slow for those on death row, represents the turning of the tide. You hear the growing chorus of skepticism from outside Salem. Influential figures like Thomas Brattle write impassioned critiques, lambasting the trials as a wretched and deplorable affair, arguing against the very foundations of the judicial process being employed. These written critiques, though not immediately stopping the executions, begin to chip away at the public's unquestioning acceptance of the trials. They provide intellectual ammunition for those who harbored private doubts but lack the courage or platform to voice them. A curious and rarely discussed detail emerges during this period: the concept of witch's milk or witch's teats. Accused witches, particularly women, were subjected to humiliating physical examinations where midwives or juries of matrons would search for supernumerary teats or witch marks on their bodies. These were supposedly small, unusual growths that a witch's familiar, a demonic animal spirit would suckle. Any mole, wart, or skin tag could be interpreted as such a mark, leading to further conviction. The invasive and demeaning nature of these examinations highlights the extreme lengths to which the authorities would go to find physical proof of a devilish pact. Further stripping the accused of their dignity, the sheer volume of false confessions also begins to raise eyebrows. You notice the pattern: many who confess eventually recant, claiming they were coerced or driven to lie out of desperation to save their lives. While these recantations are initially dismissed or met with further pressure, their growing number adds to the overall sense of unease. If so many are confessing and then recanting, can the confessions truly be trusted? The reliability of the evidence, once considered sacrosanct, is now being openly questioned, albeit cautiously. The magistrates themselves are caught in a difficult position. They truly believed they were fighting the devil and upholding God's law. To admit error would be to question their own piety and risk public condemnation. Yet, the escalating chaos and the accusations against respected individuals force them to confront the possibility that they might have been grievously mistaken. You sense their internal struggle, the conflict between their deeply held beliefs and the unfolding, horrifying reality. The academic debate about the role of gender in the Salem Witch Trials remains a prominent topic. While a significant majority of the accused and executed were women, historians still debate whether this reflects a deeper misogyny within Puritan society, or if women, particularly those who deviated from traditional roles, were simply more vulnerable targets. Some scholars argue that the patriarchal nature of Puritan society contributed to the ease with which women could be accused, while others highlight that social and economic status often played a more decisive role than gender alone. You observe how readily societal anxieties about female power or independence could be channeled into accusations of witchcraft. By late October 1692, the tide truly turns. Governor Phipps, influenced by his own wife's brush with accusation, by the pleas of influential ministers like Increase Mather Cotton, Mather's father, and by the growing public outcry, orders a halt to the trials. Increase Mather, in particular, publishes his influential work, Cases of Conscience Concerning Evil Spirits, which strongly argues against the use of spectral evidence and cautions against the overzealous pursuit of witches. His theological authority lends immense weight to the argument for moderation and caution. You feel a profound sense of relief, albeit tinged with the lingering sorrow of all that has been lost. The special court of Oyer and Terminer is dissolved. When new courts are established in January 1693, they are explicitly instructed not to admit spectral evidence. This crucial change immediately leads to a dramatic decrease in convictions. Most of the remaining accused are acquitted, and Governor Phipps eventually issues pardons for those still imprisoned. The nightmare, for many, is finally over, though the scars will remain for generations. The unmasking of the truth, or at least the realization of profound error, begins. You breathe a sigh of cautious relief as the darkest days of the Salem Witch Trials begin to recede, leaving behind a trail of devastation and profound regret. The new courts, established in January 1693, mark a pivotal shift. The crucial change, as you recall, is the explicit rejection of spectral evidence as admissible testimony. This single decision, more than any other, fundamentally alters the course of justice. Without the ability of the afflicted to simply claim invisible torment from the accused specter, the entire flimsy edifice of the witchcraft prosecutions collapses. You witness the dramatic change in the courtroom atmosphere. Accused individuals, who previously faced almost certain condemnation, are now largely acquitted. Without the spectral evidence, there is simply no tangible proof to convict them. The former accusers, no longer able to sway the proceedings with their dramatic fits, find their power diminished and their credibility eroded. Many of them eventually recant their testimonies, admitting they were mistaken or even outright fabricating their stories. Though these admissions come too late for those who perished, the remaining accused, those who had languished in jail for months, often in dreadful conditions, are finally released. You imagine their relief, a mix of profound joy at their freedom and deep sorrow for the loved ones they lost, the reputations irrevocably damaged, and the lives that can never be fully restored. The financial ruin inflicted upon these families is also immense. They are often forced to pay for their own imprisonment and trial costs, even after being acquitted. This lingering injustice speaks volumes about the systemic failures of the period. A significant, yet often overlooked detail is the public apology and restitution that eventually follows. Years later, in 1702, the General Court of Massachusetts declares the trials unlawful. Even more remarkably, in 1706, Anne Putnam Jr., one of the most prominent of the afflicted accusers, publicly apologizes for her role, stating that she desired to lie in the dust and mourn and be humble for the blood guiltiness that had fallen on the land. This act of public contrition, though occurring belatedly, is a rare and powerful testament to the recognition of the horrific errors made. You feel a pang of bittersweet recognition, acknowledging that while the apology offered a measure of closure, it could never truly mend the lives that were shattered. The aftermath of the trials is a period of deep reflection and collective guilt for the community. You see churches grappling with the roles their ministers played, some actively promoting the hysteria, others remaining silent, and a few bravely speaking out. The memory of the trials hangs heavy over Salem, a dark cloud that takes generations to dissipate. Families are torn apart by the events, some moving away from the village to escape the painful reminders. The very name Salem becomes synonymous with injustice and mass delusion. The historical debate regarding the long-term impact of the Salem witch trials on the American legal system is extensive. Many historians argue that the trials served as a crucial lesson, leading to reforms that emphasized due process, the rejection of unreliable evidence, and the importance of separating church and state in legal matters. While direct causation can be difficult to prove, the trials undeniably spurred a reevaluation of judicial procedures and the dangers of allowing religious fervor to dictate legal outcomes. This is a critical point. It's not just a story of horror, but also a catalyst for progress. You observe the profound psychological scars left on those who survived. Many of the accusers eventually suffer from various ailments, perhaps psychosomatic, as the weight of their actions bears down on them. The accused survivors often live out their lives with the stigma of being labeled a witch, even after their names are legally cleared. This long shadow of suspicion and fear illustrates the deep-seated impact of public opinion and collective hysteria, one particularly intriguing yet less common. Academic discussion revolves around the concept of repressed memory in relation to the accusers. While most historians attribute the accuser's behavior to a combination of genuine belief, mass hysteria, and deliberate fabrication for attention or other motives, some speculative theories have explored whether underlying trauma or psychological distress might have manifested in these dramatic ways. Though this remains a highly debated and less accepted interpretation, you find yourself pondering the complex interplay of individual psychology and societal pressures that contributed to such a dark chapter. The exact number of lives lost to the Salem witch trials stands as a stark testament to the tragedy. 19 individuals were hanged on Gallows Hill. One man, Giles Corey, was pressed to death, and several others died in prison due to the harsh conditions. You remember their names and the chilling circumstances of their deaths, realizing that these were not mere statistics, but real people with real lives and families. The legacy of the Salem witch trials continues to resonate in modern society. You often hear references to witch hunts whenever there is a period of intense public paranoia or unfounded accusations against a group or individual. The phrase has become a powerful metaphor for the dangers of unchecked fear, mob mentality, and the erosion of individual rights in the face of collective panic. This enduring relevance speaks to the universal lessons embedded in this painful historical episode. As time passes, the memory of the trials becomes a cautionary tale, passed down through generations. It serves as a reminder of the fragility of justice, the dangers of superstition, and the importance of critical thinking in the face of overwhelming emotion. The people of Salem, and indeed the broader colony, were forced to confront the terrifying consequences of their actions, leading to a long process of reckoning and repentance. The end of the active trials is not the end of the story, but rather the beginning of a long and difficult road towards understanding and reconciliation. You now find yourself looking back at the aftermath of the Salem witch trials, a period of profound reflection and grappling with a dark legacy. The direct cessation of the trials in 1693 was merely the first step. The true healing and reckoning would take decades, if not centuries. You observe how the scars of this intense period of fear and injustice lingered, shaping the collective consciousness of the community and the broader colony. The people of Salem and Massachusetts were forced to confront a deeply unsettling truth they had, in their zealous pursuit of evil, committed grave injustices against their own. This realization led to a slow, painful process of introspection. You see individuals who had played active roles, judges, jurors, even some of the accusers, publicly expressing remorse. This act of repentance, though long in coming, was crucial for the community to begin the process of reconciliation and to move forward from the traumatic events. A widely known historical fact is that in 1697, the General Court of Massachusetts ordered a day of fasting and prayer to atone for the tragedy that had befallen the colony. Judge Samuel Sewall, one of the magistrates involved in the trials, publicly confessed his error and expressed profound regret for his role, standing before his congregation while his confession was read aloud. This public act of contrition by a key figure in the trials served as a powerful symbol of the colony's growing recognition of its failures. You imagine the hushed reverence in the church, the weight of guilt palpable in the air, as such a public admission of error was made. The impact on individual lives was, of course, immense and permanent. You consider the families of those executed, forever branded by the accusation of witchcraft, even after the legal exonerations. Their names, once respected, were now tainted by a stain that would take generations to fade. Similarly, those who had been accused and imprisoned, even if eventually released, carried the physical and psychological burdens of their ordeal for the rest of their lives. You think of the cold, damp cells, the constant fear, the public humiliation, experiences that would haunt anyone indefinitely. A lesser-known but fascinating detail related to the aftermath is the eventual reversal of attainders for many of the victims. In English law, attainder meant that a person condemned for a capital crime lost all civil rights and property, which was then forfeited to the crown. Even after the trials were deemed unlawful, the families of the victims had to petition the government for years to have these attainders reversed and their good names, as well as their property, restored. This bureaucratic struggle, extending into the early 18th century, underscores the lingering practical consequences of the injustice and the slow, arduous path to full rehabilitation. You imagine the determination of these families fighting for justice long after the gallows had been dismantled. The academic discussion around the long-term theological impact of the trials on Puritanism itself is quite significant. Some scholars argue that the Salem Witch Trials exposed a profound flaw in the rigid, hyper-vigilant strain of Puritan theology, particularly its emphasis on a literal, active devil at work in the world. The events forced a re-evaluation of how human suffering and misfortune should be interpreted, leading to a more nuanced, less literal understanding of supernatural evil. While Puritanism itself continued, its extreme manifestation in the context of witch hunts largely faded, replaced by a more cautious approach to interpreting divine will and human malevolence. You observe how the narratives surrounding the trials evolve over time. Initially, the focus might have been on the afflicted and the perceived threat of witchcraft. But as the years turn into decades, the perspective shifts. The story becomes less about the witches and more about the victims, about the dangers of unchecked power, mass hysteria, and the abuse of the legal system. This evolution in narrative reflects a society coming to terms with its own historical failings, attempting to learn from its past mistakes. The legacy of Salem extends beyond academic study. It becomes a powerful cultural touchstone. You see references to the Salem Witch Trials in literature, theater, film, and popular culture, often serving as a cautionary tale against conformity, persecution, and the dangers of allowing fear to dictate public policy. The phrase witch hunt itself, as you've already noted, becomes a universally understood idiom for unjust persecution. This enduring resonance speaks to the timeless relevance of the lessons learned from Salem. Consider the ongoing efforts to memorialize the victims. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, dedicated memorials were erected in Salem, providing a solemn space for remembrance and reflection. These acts of public commemoration represent a conscious effort by modern society to acknowledge the past, honor the innocent lives lost, and ensure that the lessons of the trials are never forgotten. You feel the weight of history in these quiet spaces, where the names of the victims are etched into stone, a permanent reminder of a community's tragic folly. The question that often arises in historical discussions is, could something like the Salem Witch Trials happen again? While the specific context of 17th century Puritan New England is unique, the underlying human elements, fear of the unknown, scapegoating, the power of demagoguery, and the susceptibility to mass hysteria are unfortunately universal. Historians often point to other periods of intense social panic or persecution, from the McCarthy era in the 20th century to modern-day moral panics, as echoes of the Salem phenomenon, albeit without the supernatural framing. You ponder this question, realizing the importance of vigilance and critical thinking in any age. The process of healing and reconciliation in Salem was long and arduous. It involved not only official apologies and reversals of attainder, but also a gradual shift in societal attitudes and beliefs. The echoes of the trials served as a stark, enduring reminder that even a deeply religious and well-intentioned community could be led astray by fear and unchecked power, ultimately consuming its own. The story of Salem, in its aftermath, transforms from a tale of horror into a profound lesson on justice, tolerance, and the enduring human capacity for both cruelty and eventual repentance. You now turn your gaze beyond the specific events of Salem, recognizing that the terrifying phenomenon of witch hunts and mass hysteria is not unique to 17th century New England. The Salem Witch Trials, while perhaps the most famous in American history, are but one chilling chapter in a much larger global narrative of fear-driven persecution. You begin to explore other historical instances, revealing the universal patterns of human susceptibility to irrationality and injustice when confronted with perceived threats or anxieties. Consider the European witch hunts, a phenomenon that swept across the continent for several centuries, roughly from the 14th to the 18th century, predating and influencing the events in Salem. You learn that hundreds of thousands of people, predominantly women, were accused, tortured, and executed as witches across Europe. The numbers dwarf those in Salem, in Germany, France, Scotland, and Scandinavia. The scale of persecution was immense. These hunts were often fueled by similar factors: religious fervor, social unrest, economic hardship, and a pervasive belief in the devil's active interference in the world. You realize that Salem was not an isolated anomaly, but rather a late, localized manifestation of a much broader, longer-running global tragedy. A widely known historical fact about the European witch hunts is the use of even more brutal and elaborate methods of torture to extract confessions. While Salem utilized confinement and psychological pressure, European inquisitors often employed instruments like the thumbscrews, strappado, a form of rope torture, and the rack. These methods were designed to inflict excruciating pain, forcing victims to confess to impossible crimes and implicate others, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of accusation and terror. You shudder at the thought of such deliberate cruelty, recognizing how fear can strip away human empathy and ignite a terrifying desire for retribution. You observe the common threads running through these diverse historical events. In many cases, the accusations target the marginalized elderly women, widows, those with eccentric behaviors, or individuals who challenged societal norms. These people, already on the fringes, become convenient scapegoats for collective anxieties. When crops failed, or disease spread, or political instability arose, the blame was often cast upon an identifiable, vulnerable group, diverting attention from deeper systemic issues. It's a classic pattern of scapegoating, a timeless human tendency to find an external enemy for internal problems. A particularly eerie, yet less commonly discussed detail from the European hunts involves the Devil's Pact narrative. Confessions, often extracted under torture, frequently described elaborate ceremonies where the accused would formally renounce God, sign a pact with the devil, sometimes with their own blood, and receive a familiar spirit or magical powers in return. These fantastical narratives, disseminated through pamphlets and sermons, fueled public fear and reinforced the belief in a widespread satanic conspiracy. It's fascinating how cultural narratives about evil can shape and be shaped by actual events, creating a terrifying feedback loop. The academic discussion on the role of legal systems and institutional power in facilitating witch hunts is profound. While popular fear played a significant role, historians argue that it was the legitimization of these fears by legal and religious authorities that truly unleashed the widespread persecutions. When courts accepted spectral evidence, when magistrates believed confessions extracted under torture, and when church leaders endorsed the hunt, The hysteria gained institutional backing, making it incredibly difficult to stop. This highlights the immense responsibility of those in positions of power to uphold justice and resist succumbing to popular pressure or irrational fears. You consider other instances of mass hysteria and persecution throughout history, recognizing the echoes of Salem. Think of the Red Scare in the United States in the mid-20th century, particularly the McCarthy era. Here, the enemy wasn't witches but communists, perceived as a hidden, insidious threat undermining American society. Accusations, often based on flimsy evidence or mere association, led to blacklisting, job losses, and shattered reputations. While no lives were lost to execution, the social and economic devastation for those accused was immense. The language of loyalty oaths and rooting out subversives bears an uncanny resemblance to the rhetoric of the witch trials. Another chilling parallel is found in moments of intense religious or political purges, such as parts of the French Revolution during the Reign of Terror, where perceived enemies of the revolution were swiftly condemned and executed without fair trial. Or even more recently, the Rwandan genocide, where deeply ingrained ethnic prejudices were exploited and amplified, leading to mass atrocities. While the contexts differ wildly, the underlying mechanics of dehumanization, scapegoating, and the breakdown of rational judgment in the face of collective panic are strikingly similar. You realize that these historical events serve as crucial reminders that the human capacity for irrationality and cruelty, when fueled by fear and prejudice, is ever present. The specific enemy may change: witches, communists, ethnic groups, religious minorities. But the pattern of suspicion, accusation, and persecution remains remarkably consistent. The importance of vigilance, critical thinking, and the protection of individual liberties against the tyranny of the majority becomes overwhelmingly clear. The historians continue to debate the specific triggers for these broader waves of hysteria. Was it climate change leading to crop failures and famine? The rise of new theological interpretations? Or merely the ebb and flow of human anxieties during periods of rapid social change? The answer is likely multifaceted, a complex interplay of environmental, social, religious, and political factors that create fertile ground for such dark chapters in human history. You are left with a powerful, if sobering, conclusion, while we might believe ourselves more enlightened than our ancestors. The raw emotions of fear and the tendency to find easy targets for blame are deeply ingrained in the human psyche. The lessons from Salem, and from the thousands of other witch hunts and persecutions throughout history, are not just dusty tales from a bygone era. They are urgent warnings, reminding us to remain eternally vigilant against the seeds of suspicion, the allure of easy answers, and the terrifying power of unchecked collective panic. You now arrive at the final chapter of our journey through the chilling history of the Salem Witch Trials and their broader implications. Having witnessed the rise and fall of this particular madness, and having glimpsed similar phenomena across time and space, you are left to ponder the profound lessons these events offer. The past, as they say, is a foreign country, but its echoes can still guide us, if we choose to listen. The most immediate and perhaps most crucial lesson from Salem is the fragility of justice in the face of fear. You've seen how quickly a legal system, designed to protect the innocent, can be perverted into an instrument of terror when collective panic takes hold. The reliance on spectral evidence, the coercive nature of confessions, and the unwavering conviction of guilt without tangible proof all serve as stark warnings. This underscores the absolute necessity of due process, the right to a fair trial, the presumption of innocence, and the rigorous scrutiny of evidence. Principles that, however mundane they might seem today, were hard-won lessons from historical catastrophes like Salem. Consider the role of mass hysteria and groupthink. You observed how a small spark of fear, perhaps amplified by genuine suffering or even psychological suggestion, could ignite a wildfire of accusations that consumed an entire community. When people abandon individual critical thinking and instead succumb to the collective emotion or narrative, the consequences can be devastating. This is a timeless reminder to question prevailing narratives, to seek out diverse perspectives, and to resist the urge to conform simply because everyone else believes it. A common misconception you might encounter is that such events could never happen again in a modern society. However, Historians often point out that while the specific context of 17th century witchcraft might be gone, the underlying human tendencies are not. The academic debate around the concept of moral panic draws direct parallels, examining how societies periodically identify a folk devil, a group or phenomenon perceived as a threat to societal values, and then engage in an exaggerated response, often leading to widespread fear and persecution. From anxieties about youth subcultures to perceived national security threats, the mechanics of identifying an enemy and demonizing them remain strikingly similar to the Salem phenomenon. Another vital lesson is the danger of scapegoating. When communities face internal strife, economic hardship, or unexplained misfortunes, there's a powerful human tendency to find an external target for blame. In Salem, it was the witches who were convenient scapegoats for crop failures, illness, and social tensions. This pattern repeats throughout history, reminding us to be wary when blame is disproportionately cast upon a vulnerable minority, diverting attention from systemic issues or more complex realities. You also recognize the critical responsibility of those in authority. The ministers, magistrates, and influential citizens in Salem, with a few brave exceptions, largely failed in their duty to uphold justice and provide rational leadership. Their fervent belief in the devil's literal presence blinded them to the possibility of judicial error and allowed the hysteria to escalate. This emphasizes the importance of independent institutions, ethical leadership, and the courage to stand against popular opinion when justice is at stake. As the historian often posits, the problem was not merely the belief in witches, but the institutionalization of that belief within the legal system. A less emphasized but equally important lesson is about empathy and critical compassion. When you see the sheer terror of the accused, the impossible choices they faced, and the deep suffering inflicted upon them, it's a powerful call to cultivate empathy. To understand why people acted the way they did, both the accusers and the accused, requires stepping beyond simple judgment and attempting to grasp the terrifying reality of their lives. This exercise in empathy helps us recognize the human beings behind the historical facts, preventing us from dismissing them as mere relics of a dark age. You are left with the profound understanding that the past is not simply a collection of dusty facts, but a living teacher. The horrifying trials of being a Salem witch are not just a story to tell for historical entertainment. They are a timeless mirror reflecting the darker aspects of human nature and society. By studying these events, we are reminded of the constant need for vigilance against prejudice, the imperative to protect individual liberties, and the enduring power of reason and compassion in the face of fear.